because we're recording now.
Okay.
There's no way of getting out of this now. Oh, hang on a second.
I can reach.
You can reach the what?
I can reach through my my video and my little camera here and try to strangle you, but
wow, I don't think the technology is that far yet.
You better open your eyes and open your ears, man. It's changing as we speak.
You've got the new iMac. I see the strangle option.
Strangle cam.
Yeah, strangle cam. Yeah. Oh man. So how you been? So I was actually like curiously stalking you online just to kind of to study some of this, and you had a bunch of stuff coming out last year that must have really put put the brakes on for you as far as supporting any of the releases, plus Trans-Siberian, plus all the things that you normally do. How much has this 2020 affected you, and 2021 has read?
Well, yeah. You can't. I can't sit here and cry and bitch and moan, and we all have this. We've all suffered from it. Everyone from the artists to the fans. The people that need these shows, and the
crew guys and the security and the bus drivers and the truck drivers and
And so I'm the last person that's going to come up and cry about, oh, I had this and I can't believe this. It's of course you find ways to survive. You will find your way. Everybody will find their way, but I really feel the worst for the ones that are missing out on everything. I'm missing out on being able to promote an album. Not a big deal, because I've had many albums in the past and I'll have many in the future. Mm-hmm. But there are others that are relying on every single paycheck to get through. And like you said, even the crew guys, I mean, they jump from tour to tour. They don't just do a Slash tour or a Sons of Apollo tour and then kick back for the rest of the year
and wait for the next Sons of Apollo tour. Yeah, no, it doesn't work like that in their world. So they're like boom, boom, boom. Yeah.
Yeah, so I can't really complain. I absolutely made lemonade out of this 15 months of lemons.
Yes,
and from that, I've been very creative. And you and I, we are by trade. We're musicians. We're artists. Mm-hmm. We're performers, and you need that therapy. You need that sense of that creation, that kind of even doing these lame quarantine videos, because that's your only connection to the music and to the creative world. And that's our therapy. That's how we get through. Of course, we need to survive. We need to find ways to make income or even monetize it. But the bottom line is the music, and everything that I've done the past 15 months is all my creative therapy.
Absolutely. I think that the biggest thing missing is that connection to people, because even doing like a live streaming thing is fun. Like I don't know if you've done any of that, like playing live to even if you have like 3 crew guys that are filming stuff, it's still kind of like you stop playing and it's silence. It's so much different than what we're used to. Yeah,
we live for that adulation. We live for the validation of you finish a song and people love it, or people really love it. You live for that feeling and that being on stage and that emotion that you get to share with one another. So yeah, of course.
I've certainly been on the other side of it, where people really don't like it and really don't want me to. In my younger days, avoiding beer bottles and stuff. Like, okay, this next song.
Dude, one of the things I love about hanging out with you is just hearing the stories of even just everything before you even got to Vegas, before you started planting your seed. You and the other Canadian brothers that ventured off and said, you know what, we know exactly what to do to get our names out there. We know exactly what to do to be seen and heard. And you guys did it. You all did it. And I'm so proud to call you my friends, because I love that ambition and that drive that you guys all have.
Well, that's nice to hear, especially from you. I mean, like, that's the funniest thing, because when I sat down and look at your body of work, which is a funny thing to say, but it really is a body of work when I look at everything you've done. Because I think all of us, and I think when I think about just like being in a band like Aerosmith at like 20 years old and then staying in Aerosmith till I'm 70 years old, that's kind of the dream. But it's such an exception to a much larger rule for guys like you, guys like me, having done like a lot of things. And, being able to kind of, once it's all said and done, you'll have this giant body of work behind you that everybody goes like, this is JSS. It's like all of this is JSS. And I think that's almost even better than just having been in, your very first band for 60 years or something like that, as weird as that would be.
I have to agree with you, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. I mean, of course, who doesn't want to be as big as Aerosmith? Who doesn't want to sell out arenas or sell out an incredible world tour every single year? Who doesn't want that? That's where we started. That was our dream. Mm-hmm. But in the pursuit of our dream, we found other ways of not matching it, but at least satisfying it.
Yeah,
exactly. And from that, I've been able to work with some of the best people in the world. Most of them are my heroes. Most of them became my enemies. Not most of them. Yeah. But it's the best part is being able to challenge yourself and add something to your own infrastructure. I'll use Trans-Siberian Orchestra as an example. I'm absolutely the last person you'll catch me at a Broadway play. I'm not musical theater guy. I'm not that guy. So when I got the call from Paul O'Neill to come in and meet him and see what this was all about, I really went in with hesitancy. I did not expect to want it. Even if I got it, I'm like, I don't know if this is for me.
Right.
But he was so impressionable upon me, as well as reminded me when I did just a few things. I mean, we spoke for like 7 or 8 hours before I sang one note for him.
Wow.
And then by the time he got me to do the performance side, I kind of already picked his brain, and I understood what he was looking for in terms of what TSO stands for. And that taught me a whole new lesson I never had before. He basically told me that I was built for that kind of stuff. I was built for that kind of stage. And that's the last thing I want to do is go up and sing. But it's also added a new element to what I do. I can take now elements of what I do at TSO and bring it to Sons of Apollo and so many other things, but that I didn't have before because I didn't realize I had it. And that's the beauty of challenging yourself and going out and just kind of, stepping outside the box.
Well, yeah, because I think it's you really kind of sell yourself short if you think you have it all figured out by the time you're 30, 35 years old or whatever, because there's always stuff that comes at you and I think you're the perfect example of a guy who's said yes to a lot of stuff that a lot of people might have been frightened to say yes to. And if you had not said yes to those things, who knows what kind of opportunities you would have missed out on in not doing them. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's, I got a lot of criticism back in the day, when, especially in the late 80s or early 90s, when I really was I was putting my stamp on a lot of different things. Yeah. People would actually, they were criticized saying, Jeff Scott Soto would be more of a household name if he would just stick to one thing and put the blinders on and focus on one thing. You're focusing on too many things. And I said, the only thing I could think of then, and it's still the same answer today. Can you imagine if you told that to Queen? Right. If you went to Queen and said, you guys, you do rock really well, that other stuff, that other goofy, nostalgic, disco, blues, opera, forget about all that. Just put the blinders on and take one direction. I don't want to be that guy. They didn't want to be that band, and I don't want to be that. I'm not comparing myself to Queen, but that was my inspiration. That was my bar. That was the bar that they raised. That was the one I was always going to be reaching for. And even if I never receive it or retrieve it, at least I've tried.
Yeah, and I think that there's so many examples of that. Like I always use Neil Young as my example when I talk about that kind of thing, because some people will talk about Neil Young being the loud, noisy, crazy horse, distorted guitar Neil Young. And then there's the other Neil Young that's the quiet, by himself, sitting in a tiny spotlight in the middle of playing acoustic, very touchy-feely songs. You know what I mean? I think that there's... And it's the same thing. I'm sure somebody along the way said, Neil, just focus on this one thing. Just do that and you can be. And it's like, I'm sure he said, but I want to play loud guitar. I like doing that. Right, so I'm going to do that this year. And then 2 years down the road, then I'll go back to playing acoustic guitar. And I think that that's kind of makes for a very nuanced and interesting career, because the other interesting thing about you is I don't know what your background is, and I'd love to go backwards and talk about how you got into all this, but because there's so much like R&B and soul and vibe in your voice that when pegging you as what they would assume is a hard rock vocalist seems such kind of reductive and limiting to me, because I could hear you just as easily kind of stepping into a Sam Cooke world or an Otis Redding world and being completely at home doing that. So as a kid, what was it like? You grew up in LA, right? I know I just learned that you were born you were born in New York.
Born in New York. Yeah.
How old were you when you left Brooklyn, I guess it was?
I was 8 when we landed here in LA and set up shop, and haven't left yet. Haven't left since. Right. So I guess I would be considered more of a California native in terms of my identity and everything that came into my life. But yeah, you nailed it right on the head, dude. I grew up strictly R&B, soul, everything from Motown to Tom Jones to even Johnny Mathis. That was what was playing in my house. Sam Cooke, Jackie Wilson. That whole world was my world, literally until I was a teenager. By the time I got the Yngwie gig, I was only into rock maybe about 3 years.
Is that right?
I wasn't like all my other friends from grade school to middle school listening to Kiss and Cheap Trick, Ted Nugent. That was the flavor of the day, even Aerosmith.
Sure.
And I couldn't stand it. I hated Zeppelin. I couldn't stand any of it.
Really?
And it sounds blasphemous now. I wasn't into Purple. I wasn't into any of that, because to me, it was always about the vocalist. It was me wanting to be a singer as far back as I can remember talking. I wanted to be a singer. So having somebody like Michael Jackson or somebody like Tom Jones or somebody like Sam Cooke or Jackie Wilson as my focal points, those were the ones that musically took over my DNA. To listen to somebody just kind of shouting and screaming, to me, it sounded like noise. It sounded like everything like every parent says, we turned that noise down. I can't believe you're listening to such crap. That's how it sounded to me at a young age. It wasn't until Steve Perry came into the picture.
Right.
Lou Gramm came into the picture. Bobby Kimball from Toto. You had these guys that all of a sudden you're like, hang on a second. These guys, you can hear that white soul. You can hear they were raised with the same stuff that I was raised on, but they're injecting it with a hard rock vibe and feel underneath. So all of a sudden the shift began. It started with Journey. It started with Foreigner. It started with Toto. And then I could start elaborating and opening up a little more until I eventually got into the Iron Maidens and the Judas Priests of the world. And then all of a sudden Cheap Trick was one of my favorite bands. So
yeah. Well, it's a little different.
It certainly is.
Yeah. When you bring that up, because in the Judas Priest and say Iron Maiden, there are elements of those guys being obviously very strong vocalists in that field. And I suppose there's, it's probably not quite as soul oriented, but there is power and there is range and there is all those kind of things going on there. But you're not wrong when you say, when you've kind of come up in a certain level of music that is so nuanced with, flavor and soul and vibe and feel. And sometimes you get into this kind of like you said, as your parents would say, it's even like when you go back and listen to things that you were into when you were 14 years old, some of the stuff stands up. And a lot of it does not. Like a lot of it, you go, well, I guess I had to be 14, But yeah.
What was I thinking?
There's a bit of that, But that's it's true of TV shows we loved or whatever. You got to go back and you go, well, this is super cheesy. But yeah, no, I totally see that, and I think that when you started playing it, like, did it happen like normally for you? Like you started playing in rock bands? Were you playing guitar? Were you or were you just always wanted to be a vocalist, or how did that all come down?
I'll give you the abridged version. Basically,
please,
my first band that I was in, my brother was the drummer. We had a couple twins. There were two twins that lived up the street from us, and they were in a band with their older brother who was already out of school. It's kind of a Spanish band. They played all the Spanish Mexican bars or whatever, but they had tons of gear. They had a badass rehearsal space, and we're like, oh my God, this is the dream. They have all this gear and all this. So we started a band with them out of it's kind of like the Van Halen story. Dave was in the band because he owned the PA. So we started this band with these guys. And they had a singer already. The singer was in high school. I was just in 7th grade. I was 12 and I was just in junior high school, middle school.
Wow.
And so when I joined them, clearly I'm green. I'm just 12, but I knew harmonies. I knew chord structure. I was never trained. I taught myself. So I was a keyboard player, but I was also in school for playing trumpet. And I remember the first 3 songs we learned. One of them was "Fooled Around and Fell in Love." Wasted Days and Wasted Nights from Freddie Fender.
Freddie Fender, yeah.
and Ladies Night from Kool and the Gang.
Wow, that's a diverse set list with 3 songs.
Yeah. But being that I was a keyboard player, and then on Ladies Night I played trumpet because I was imagine one really badly played horn with a band that's got badass horn arrangements. So, anyways, I'll try to keep it short. We were working these 3 songs, just going over and over, because we finally booked a show at my junior high school for lunchtime. That's everybody's first the first grandstand. And now we're talking 1980, I want to say.
Sure.
No. Go back. Hang on. If it was middle school, it would have been 1978.
Okay.
If I was 12, 1977, 78, something like that. there's no phones, there's no pagers, there's no way to communicate with one another. All we get, okay, guys, on this day, everybody ditch school and make sure you get your brother to help bring in the gear in, and we load in and all that. We're at my high school auditorium, bringing this stuff in. I'm like, where's Randy? Where's the singer? Don't know. And of course, back then they also had truant officers. If you're caught ditching school, you're hopping the fence, there's somebody there, they put you in the car and they put you in a holding pen until your parents come pick you up. That's what happened to Randy.
Oh no.
So we're setting up, everybody's going, it's the bell's gonna ring in 10 minutes. What are we doing? Automatically, it's like all fingers point to Jeff. You're the singer. Because they knew I could sing. I did all the backing vocals, and when Randy wasn't there, we would toy around with other songs where I was singing, but I was a young pup. I wasn't experienced in how to sing in front of a crowd.
Sure, yeah.
So fast forward to the 10 minutes when the bell rings, and soiled underwear and and I sang that gig. I pulled off the 3 songs. I couldn't sing and play keyboards on some things, but I pulled it off, and we managed to impress everybody. From that day forward, I was a singer of the band. From that day forward, I was a singer for every band I was in.
That's crazy.
It started at 12.
It's funny because you bring up a good point, because most of us that kind of sing in one form or another, it's usually sort of like it's a bunch of guys get together to make a bunch of racket, and then you figure out who who has a less annoying voice. the least worst voice, I think, is what you just kind of like, you kind of go around the room and like, okay, he's the singer, okay.
Yeah.
But no, I think the fact that you actually kind of stepped up and could, like you say, had a sense of harmony, had a sense of melody, and could rock it was impressive. So how quickly after that are you like, do you just keep playing more like R&B based type stuff until you get roped into a rock band?
My first original rock band was I think the band was called Phase, and I'm still very good friends with the guitar player and the singer, because he had a singer he was working with for many, many years. These guys grew up, they broke bread together, and this singer ended up moving to Birmingham or something like that. He joined, I think he was in Lynyrd Skynyrd or whatever. He basically left LA, and so his buddy Chuck Duran, he was just looking for a singer, and I put an ad out in the Recycler. I don't know if you were around days of the Recycler newspaper, and he called me up, and I had to be honest. Everybody in there I'm 22, I'm a pro, I'm this and that and the other. I'm like, I'm 14 and I'm still in high school, and so Chuck took a chance on me. But the greatest thing I got from Chuck was he taught me how to use my head voice, because it was during that time my voice was shifting from that natural Michael Jackson, I could sing anything in full voice, to cracking. It's the Peter Brady syndrome.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Time to change. So he taught me how to he taught me how to use my head voice. He taught me how to use the Steve Perry technique of not destroying your voice and not struggling or straining to get the notes, but to naturally get there. And that's one of the biggest lessons I learned from Chuck. And to this day, I thank him all the time. He's in a band called, is it Rock Candy?
Oh, wow.
Or Rock Sugar. That's the name of the band, Rock Sugar.
So did
They're kind of like a mashup.
Go ahead.
They're one of those mashup bands. They'll take like Enter Sandman and Don't Stop Believing. And
wow.
Don't Stop Believing in the Bad and Sandman or something like that. But yeah, they're a fun band, and Chuck reunited with his singer eventually, and they've been able to carve out their own successes. But those are my humble beginnings. I was 14 when I was with them, and that's when I never looked back. That's when I was in the Kiss and just doing Scorpions, Maiden, and everything under the sun that was happening during that time.
Well, and we all know that a good vocalist, I mean, as much as they say, everybody has to have a good drummer, it's sort of like in the metal days, it was, the metal days were an interesting time, because you had to have a guitar player who could step up and do that stuff. You had to have a drummer who could step up and do that stuff. And you needed to have a vocalist who could sing that stuff. It was never like, you couldn't just have a guy who could kind of sing that. It was like the challenge of it all is the range and the power and the being able to do that for 90 minutes a night or however long you got to do it. It's like,
well, then you have to add the image. And that's where I suffered the most, because being of Puerto Rican descent and, having this crazy curly mop, everybody wanted the blonde-haired, blue-eyed singer.
I never thought of
everybody wanted the Joey Tempest. They wanted the Vince Neil. They wanted the David Lee Roth. And I was never going to be that. So I had to eventually find my path and find my way. And even with Yngwie, I just looked like a mutt. I didn't really have my vibe yet. And it took me probably about 5 or 6 years to finally say, this is who I am.
Right.
This is what I'm going to build on.
You know, you were really young when you got the Yngwie gig too, weren't you?
Yeah, I was still 18.
Oh, you were? Okay. So were
Yeah,
you already
was,
like doing the strip? Were you already playing around?
Never did the strip. And that was another thing. I say it all the time. I mean, I got my lucky break with Yngwie, and it would have been a completely different course if I didn't get that gig.
Right.
But I would have eventually gotten it. I mean, I know I just said my own drive and my ambition, I would have eventually gotten there, but it probably would have consisted on being a strip band and doing that whole thing, you know, giving out flyers and all that stuff. I did a little bit of it after Yngwie, but I didn't have to start there. I established myself with Yngwie. I was just a nobody, and I got that lucky call to go and meet him, and it just seemed to work out.
So really quickly, I mean, it's an interesting story. Yngwie alone is an interesting story because he's from Europe,
Sweden.
And he comes over to America to play with Steeler, I believe it was. Is that what it was?
Right.
With Ron Keel's band.
Ron Keel, yeah.
And then he decides to go out and do his own thing, or did he do a round of?
It was Alcatraz after
Alcatraz. He did, of course.
He was, when he got here, clearly everybody it was a big hoopla because, you know, let's not mince words here. You know, Yngwie was a game changer as far as the guitar.
He really was.
The same way Eddie was, the same way Randy was. He was the new game changer coming to town, so everybody was going after him. And he had two offers. He had an offer to join UFO or to start a new band, Graham Bonnet. And I think he chose the latter only because he thought, well, first of all, Graham had that connection with Richie Blackmore, and everybody knows that Yngwie was always kind of chasing the Richie Blackmore coattails back then.
Big time.
But it was more so a vocal thing. I know he knew Graham was a better singer, and he could write things that Graham's voice would be able to handle more so than writing stuff for Phil Mogg.
Interesting. So, and then at what point, so he decides to go solo, and that's when you start, I mean, how does this work for you? Like as a kid, you're like, I'm assuming someone has a demo tape and goes, check out this kid, or how does this work?
I was in a cover band in Fort Collins, Colorado that wasn't making any money. We were basically stealing food from 7-Eleven just to eat for the night. And because things weren't working out, things weren't working out for me. I'd already planned on returning back to my mom's house, and I was booking my Greyhound bus ticket. Who could afford a flight back then?
No, I know.
So one of these days before I was coming back home, I happened to be at a friend's house, and we were just chilling, watching MTV as we did back then. We watched hours and hours of MTV, and everybody happened to be out of the room when this ad came on. I was the only one sitting there. It said, I remember Mark Goodman on the screen. Yngwie Malmsteen, world acclaimed guitarist, has left the band Alcatraz, and he's doing a solo record at the moment, but he's also looking for a singer for this new project, and it could be you. And I remember the finger coming into the camera.
Wow.
And I'm looking at it, and I knew of Yngwie. I loved Yngwie.
Sure.
I listened to the Steel record. I listened to the Alcatraz record. And I used to even play him to people like, you got to listen to, oh, that's not real. They speeding up the tape. There's no way that guy's playing like that.
Right.
No, it's real. It's real. So I saw this information, but I didn't think twice about it. I didn't think I should send him my demo. The only demo I had at that time, I was 16 when I did, and I was only 18 when I was watching this ad. It's like, this guy's not, in a million years, he would never choose me or even listen to me. So my buddies came back into the room, and I told them what I just saw on MTV News. It's like, dude, you got to send your tape. Like, yeah, with what money? I don't even have I think it was like $1.33 to send my cassette to LA. I didn't even have that. And so we literally watch in rounds, in pockets of time. We watch MTV for the next 28 hours.
Oh my God.
We would take turns, like somebody's falling asleep, okay, because we wanted to see that ad again. I wanted to get the address. In my head, I remember Sunset Boulevard. I remember the address in Sunset Boulevard, but I didn't know the zip code. I didn't know Make Attention To, none of that.
Right.
So I'm like, they finally talked me into sending my tape. I had no idea where to send it to. So
yeah, I guess that's
next
important.
day we went to the post office, and I looked for that address in a big ass directory. It looked like the Bible of U.S. addresses, and I found a roundabout zip code that it would still arrive.
Okay.
So I said, screw it, I'm going to send it. I wrote Yngwie Malmsteen audition. I didn't know who to address it to, and it was a crapshoot. And I told my mom. I could remember calling my mom and said, if you get a call from Yngwie Malmsteen, she goes, we what? Nobody could say his name back then. Yeah. To this day, she can't say his name. I said, if just listen to if you get a call for somebody looking for me as a singer, please get a number. That's it. You don't have to worry. Don't worry about his name. I moved back home 2 weeks after that. I sent that, and I lost hope. And lo and behold, it was one Saturday morning, the phone rang, and it was Yngwie's manager saying Yngwie was down at the record plant in Hollywood. He'd like to meet you. Thank God I was already back in LA, because I literally went that day to go meet him, and the rest is history.
It's so crazy, man. Like, it's like what a real sort of like shot in the arm for anybody who thinks like, oh, I can't do that. No one's gonna, why would they pick me? Or I don't really know the address. The fact that you kind of like fate just had its way of lining all these things up, and sure enough, you went down there. So when you went down that day, did you sing, or you just went down and met him, or how'd that work?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I guess I should have ended this with with what I'm about to tell you here. But I'm already talking about it. The manager told me weeks after the fact that out of all the tapes that were sent, and he said there were like 2 boxes of tapes, and they were just loaded with just different singers and different things, but others reviewed them before they played them to Yngwie, because he didn't want to waste his time. He was recording an album. It's like, you guys know what I'm looking for. I'm not going to sit here and listen to every single tape inquiry that's come in. So you guys kind of sift through them. Manager told me he only brought 2 tapes to Yngwie to listen to. The first one was the worst of the bunch. It was like the most absolute Cookie Monster gargling swords kind of singer, and mine. Wow. And I'm like, well, why'd you do that? He goes, because I wanted to give him the worst of the bunch and the best of the bunch. And like, damn, not too bad. I mean, again, awesome, I was 16 when I sang on this particular demo. It was my second original band, a band called Canaan.
Wow.
And so yeah, I went down to the studio that afternoon. He was coy and cocky, and just like he wasn't giving me any personality at all from the get-go. He's basically sitting behind the desk, the recording monitor, the recording desk with his engineers, recording a solo, going back, and goes, "Oh, I'll be with you in a minute." It wasn't like, "Okay, let's take a break, guys." It was like, when I'm done, and I didn't care. I looked at it as, I'm going to meet Yngwie Malmsteen. I'm watching him record. This is awesome. If I walk away from this, I've scored. Totally, yeah. So finally, like 35 minutes, he takes a break, and we go into one of the ISO booths, in studios. For those who don't know, every studio, big recording studio, has their different rooms, and different smaller rooms, bigger rooms for tracking drums or tracking guitars, whatever. He was in room A, with a big room at the record plant.
It's a record plant. Okay, yeah.
And so we went into, there was one of the smaller rooms that basically it looked like a storage compartment for Guitar Center. It was literally like 75 guitars laid out across the room, some in cases, some kind of leaning against the wall. It was crazy. Yeah. So we walk in there, he grabs an acoustic and he starts playing. I don't know what to do here. He wasn't prepared. He didn't know how to audition me. So he goes, "Okay, I got this one song," and maybe for the chorus, it's a la da 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 da. So it was the song "As Above, So Below."
Okay, sure.
So he's playing the rhythm. I'm like, okay, and I'm just like coming up with just mock melodies, just something to sing over it, and writing like mock lyrics. Okay, just something so we can actually listen to one another. He gets to the chorus, "I will never fly because I will not." You get to that, and goes, man, sounds really cool. And I'm singing in full voice, and full on Jeff Scott Soto Viking voice. Where he's playing an acoustic guitar, just totally blowing him out on the volume. And he goes, "Man, that sounds really good, man. Let's put it down." Put what down? What do you mean?
Oh, wow.
And then so I followed him, and we went into the room, and they go, "Put up As Above, So Below." I'm like, what's going on here? They put the tape up, and it's the same song he's played on acoustic. There's the master recording. And engineer goes, "Okay, Jeff, let's get your vocal mic check." And I'm like, what the? So dude, it was right out of Rockstar, right out of the movie.
So day one, you're recording a vocal on the album. Wow.
And I somewhere in my garage, I still have that original cassette. They sent me home with a copy of that I could listen to, see what my progress that day. All I remember especially when I got that really high note in the end of the chorus, I just remember looking through the glass, and as you know, in studios, you got the double pane glass. Sometimes there's a bit of a glare. You can't really see what's going on. You can't hear what's going on.
Yeah.
I just remember the managers jumping up with excitement. Like, is he excited or is he angry because I'm so shitty? So I get one pass. There was no punching. There was no do-overs. I just did one pass, got to the very end of the song with that, as long as I could hold it. Went in the room, and Yngwie, cool as a cucumber, still goes, "Yeah, man, this show's pretty good." Listen,
Yeah.
I got a lot of stuff to do here, so I think the best thing for us to do is maybe you come over to my house, and I've got a 4-track recording studio, and I got a few songs I'm working on. Maybe we can just see what this is like further. This album I'm working on has 2 songs with vocals, but I don't think they're the right ones to be checking you out on. I want to hear what you're like to work with and work on, and I'm great.
Wow.
So it literally was 3 weeks of back and forth to his house doing I'll See the Light Tonight, I'm a Viking, Caught in the Middle, all these songs that ended up on Marching Out. We were just doing demo versions of them, and man, it was a nail biter for me because I didn't know if he liked what he was hearing. All I knew is he was basically asking me to come over every day to work, and he was using me for a ride to the Rainbow, and I was basically his designated driver because I didn't drink. So I thought,
funny.
I'm just his piss boy, and he's basically just dragging me on all these songs so I could take him around town and make sure that he's got a ride home when he's drunk. And it was like 3 weeks later. It wasn't even from him. It was the manager's secretary that called me and said, "Hi, Jeff, so-and-so from the office, and we need to get some information from you. And oh, by the way, welcome to the band."
Wow.
That was my induction into Yngwie's band.
That's so crazy. And you're literally 18 years old. You're like
18 years old. It was, I joined him. I was officially in the band August of '84, and November of '84, I turned 19.
Crazy. Wow.
So the first two songs with vocals on that debut album, I was still 18. We recorded the first weekend of September of 1984, and that album literally came out like 2 months later. It came out just after my I think it was just after my 19th birthday, and we were already immediately in full gear starting on the Marching Out album.
That's so crazy, man. So how does that? Is it boom? You're into like no longer you robbing 7-Elevens. You're on a tour bus. You're like playing proper gigs, and like I don't know what size rooms was he playing right away with that?
With the US, it was all clubs, but every one of them was packed. There was not one club that it wasn't wall to wall people. In Japan, it certainly was the bigger halls.
Sure.
I've done. I'm trying to think of a reference of something that's still active now. What's the one? I'm trying to think of the one in Tokyo. This one's Nagano Sun Plaza. I don't know if you know that one.
I think so. I think I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
But and they were all sold out as well. So in Japan, Yngwie was absolutely bigger, and that was the only deal he had originally. He was only signed to Polydor in Japan, and it was because the first album he released got nominated for a Grammy, and it sold so many in the US on an import. That's when Polygram, hang on a second, we got something here. Let's release this album. And Marching Out was done. Marching Out was supposed to be the first official band album, where Yngwie Malmsteen's Rising Force, that was supposed to be his solo album. Marching Out was supposed to be the band album. And then when Polygram realized, hang on a second, now we're nominated for a Grammy for Best Instrumental Album. You're selling like crazy. We're holding on to Marching Out, and that's coming out later. Let's focus on promoting the first album. So the first tour I did with him, a world tour, was all songs from Marching Out that nobody'd heard yet.
Wow.
They'd only know the other 2 songs on the first album, which we only did one of as far as the vocal songs, and then everything else was Alcatraz covers or songs from Marching Out that nobody knew. So it was weird touring song, and you're trying to sell something that nobody's ever heard.
But I meant that's not unusual to get out before a record kind of drops, and kind of do that thing.
Right.
So you're doing Japan, you're doing all this stuff at 19 years old.
Yes, sir. 1985 was the literally from the second week of January until I left the band, which was like late May that year. I didn't even make it 6 months, and a lot of that had to do with my bubble was kind of burst. It was kind of popped of what I expected. I kind of, when you go through all the hard knocks of trying to get known and people know who you are in the business, and you kind of have a feeling of, oh, now I've made it. This is what it's going to look like. What you were asking me, was it everything you wanted? It was everything I didn't want. It was the opposite. It was almost like starting from scratch again. And I just didn't want any part of it. Everything was all the focus was what us, especially the singer. and I was treated sometimes by the personnel, by the the office personnel, or even the label personnel, as kind of a janitor. And I thought I had a little more to offer and a little more deserving than, just to feel like somebody that's pushing them up.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about that whole world, but it seems like with the high turnover of people that came after you, that was a problem that probably exists today. I don't know.
Yeah,
but
well,
yeah.
And that was the thing. There's a term that I got from Eric Singer, and it's something I wish I'd learned sooner. It basically says, he told me, know the gig, keep the gig.
Right.
And you go into Yngwie's situation knowing that it's Yngwie's situation. You're not going to be growing. You're not going to be asked to do this. You're not going to be part of. Joel and Turner was that was a whole different structure, because Joe, he was coming in with a name. He was coming in with his own legacy. But anybody knew coming in Yngwie's band, like many other situations that you and I both encountered, it's not about you. You could be the best of the best, but they're not there to see you. So you got to know where your role is. You got to understand your role. And back then I wanted more of a role and I wasn't getting it. So I bounced.
Yeah. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that, because I think that, rather than sitting there just getting more and more miserable and then, making friends with Jack Daniels, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse or something. So
that was my problem. I didn't drink, smoke, or take any drugs. And if I did, I probably could have put up with it.
Yeah, exactly. You might still be there. Yeah,
right.
No, I don't. Actually, that's kind of always been a really cool thing. I think that you and I are, as the most boring guy in Las Vegas here, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't gamble. So, but I always think it's really a commendable thing that you've always been in that game and never really succumbed to any of the the weaknesses that happen to just be there. They happen to be everywhere, really. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say not completely. When I joined Boogie Nights, I was a full-blown alcoholic, but not in the negative sense. It was certainly in the fun sense, and
in the
even
celebratory sense.
The end of well, towards the end, it was certainly more of a suppressing sense, because we had this thing, and I'm sure you can relate when you're doing those kind of cover gigs that are really popular, and you kind of, oh God, you get to the venue, like you start getting dressed. We call it the boogie blues, the Boogie Nights of the boogie. You're putting on the polyester and the wig and going, oh God, I don't want to do this. But strangely, even in the worst corporate circumstance, as soon as you hit the stage, it becomes fun. And then a few drinks makes it even more fun.
Exactly. I know. That's the funniest thing about that whole world, is it's like, you have to be careful. I think you've done a very good job of kind of being able to maintain all that. So what happens after Yngwie? Like, you go home and regroup, or what?
Yeah, I started a new group with my brother called L'Amour. We named it after the famous club in Brooklyn. And we spelled it the same way. And I was really, 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 really heavily into Prince and the whole Minneapolis thing, even Janet Jackson, what Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis were doing with her, et cetera.
Right.
So from that, I wanted the image to change. I didn't want to look like a metal guy with the bangs and the typical rock clothing. Right. I wanted to do something a little more glammed out, but something that kind of married the two worlds of Prince and Van Halen, or Prince and Iron Maiden, or something, whatever.
Sure, yeah.
I wanted to have that. I wanted to have the image and the sound of those two worlds, because there were bands that were coming and doing that eventually that just blew me away, that I wanted to do that kind of stuff.
Totally.
A band like Dan Reed Network, or even Extreme, they were able to kind of combine the two, the groove factor of having hard rock, but with the kind of danceable beat. Yeah. So I started this band L'Amour, and not even I guess it was about a year and 2 months later, I get the call that they weren't too happy with Mark Bowles, who was my replacement in Yngwie's band. The tour was about to start, but Yngwie was having issues, and would I be interested in rejoining the tour and rejoining the band to be on tour? And of course, I had to change a few things of how I was treated, and especially on the monetary side, which was very, very poor. It was really? So bad. It was almost like we were begging for the pennies that we weren't making.
Wow.
We were offered pennies to the dollar, and we weren't even making that.
Oh,
and I don't blame Yngwie. He was completely oblivious to all this stuff, but I blame the people around him. And bottom line is, I had to make sure that my deal this time was structured properly, so I could actually do this and feel good about it. And I was with him until, was it January '87, and that's when I think it was a unanimous decision. I didn't really want to continue, and I think they were looking for a larger scope, is why they brought in Joel and Turner.
Yeah, right. I remember that too. It was, but I mean, even that was very short-lived for Joe. So it's a whole other thing. But yeah, so what happens after that? I mean, I know that it's such a funny thing because your relapse with Yngwie Malmsteen is another successful go-round, but I'm sure it's fraught with the same problems. Even if you fix
absolutely
pieces of it here and there, it's still going to
absolutely
it's still not going to be satisfying enough for yourself.
Absolutely, no. You're 100% right, and that's, I kind of joke when people ask me, the infamous question, what was it like to work with Yngwie Malmsteen? I always answer, I don't know. I know you're unfrozen now. Yeah. So bottom line is, where was I? Shit.
You weren't working with him; you were working for him. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of when I went into overdrive, kind of a reinvention of myself. I now wanted the world to know I was more than a metal screamer, because you're only as good as your last effort. Everybody knows that. Everybody's going to remember you by the last thing you did. And all people knew of me was singing I'm a Viking and I'll see the light tonight. So that's when I went into working with bands and acts that had more of a rounded sound, something that gave me a little more to chew onto as a singer, as a writer, and just kind of, like I said, finding my own identity.
Sure.
And it was, I was in a band called Eyes, and that was like the most commercial AOR hard rock thing that I was actually doing during that time. And that really helped me redefine that I wanted to be that kind of singer and that kind of image more so than to be a metal guy.
Right. I think, like you said, we were talking about that originally. It's like, it's clear to me that as a rock vocalist, I think that's what people really like about you, even though they play hard rock, is your ability to kind of have that sort of big, feel, and big R&B kind of, like, you're doing stuff that most metal guys just can't do, period. And it's just not
one of my greatest validations that I've received as a singer. And it was only a few years ago. It's strange because I've played with some of the greatest and some of the biggest names, and I've done some great things in my life that I'm so proud of. But one of the biggest validations I ever overheard, I wasn't even part of the conversation, was hearing Mike Portnoy doing an interview in one of the other rooms when we were on tour with Sons of Apollo. And he said, one of the things I love about Jeff's voice is he brings a soul and R&B vibe into prog music. He goes, you name me one singer that you can actually hear that kind of the drawing from that R&B kind of Motownish kind of thing. That he said, I can't think of one. And we scored because we have the one guy that can actually take what's normally seen or viewed or heard as kind of a stiff kind of, very paint by numbers kind of singer, and there's a lot of soul and moving emotion, and it goes, and that to me was one of the greatest validations, because it's exactly what I set forth from the very beginning of when I started singing as a kid. I wanted to be that kind of singer.
You're absolutely right, because most prog type singers tend to be operatic at best. You know what I mean? There's a lot of that kind of like, but it tends to be just a technical and sometimes stiff kind of music form. But the Sons of Apollo does not sound like that, mostly because of you, frankly. I think that's, so how quickly are you like into like, are you doing solo stuff by this point, or does Journey come along, or how does that all go down?
Yeah, I mean, it took me years. It was a band called Talisman that I was part of for a long stretch, and that started in 1990, kind of towards the end of Eyes. Eyes was a great vehicle for me to kind of reinvent myself, but Talisman was the one that I absolutely truly felt at home. Talisman was my home now. Yeah, and I did a bunch of other stuff in between then. You had to make a living. And back then I was not touring at all. It was one of the reasons why my voice was so strong for so many years.
Sure.
Everybody was out touring and drinking and doing whatever they're doing. And they come home and they're trashed for the next record. I was fresh as a morning daisy. But I wasn't touring, and I was missing that part of my life. Talisman would go out for like maybe 3 weeks, and then a year would go by before the next thing. And then I was working with this guitar player named Axel Rudi Pell from Germany. Sure. And I'd go out and tour with him for like a month, but it was so sparse. It was so sporadic that I wanted to be part of something that was moving constantly all the time again and playing again live. And that's where the Boogie Nights came in 1995, I believe it was. Right. When I joined one of the offshoot bands called the Polyester Pimps. And all the guys in the Polyester Pimps were the guys that are now in Steel Panther. It was kind of funny.
Right?
So yeah, I did 5 years of Boogie Nights, and that was kind of my residency, money making, while I'm waiting for something real to happen moment. Yeah. And so I did Boogie Nights from 95 until 2001 is when I finally walked away and dove headfirst into doing all my original stuff again. Did my first solo album in 2002 with Frontiers Records, which eventually led to a second record, which eventually led to meeting Neil Sean. We started the band Soul Circus together, and that was my initiation to getting on the journey.
How did that happen? How did you meet Neil? Was he aware of you through your solo records kind of thing?
No, not at all. He'd only seen and heard about my name through a site called melodicrock.com. That's still around. And he used to visit the site all the time, basically to see what people are talking about Journey, and just, he was just a frequent visitor of the site as a reader, as a fan of seeing and hearing what's going on. From that, obviously he knew the guy that ran the site as well as I did. It was during the time, I think it was 2004. Was it? Yeah, it was 2004 when Sammy went back to Van Halen. Sammy was out, went back to Van Halen for a reunion tour, but he and Neil already started a band called Planet Us with Michael Anthony and Dean Castronovo.
Right.
And Neil had a bunch of songs. They'd only recorded 2 at that point. But Sammy's like, sorry, Neil, I'm going back. I don't know how long it's going to last. This could be permanent. This could blow up. Who knows? But I'm doing this. And Neil's like, damn, I have all these songs. I have kind of a bit of downtime from Journey. I want to follow up with this. So he reached out to Andrew and he said, who is this Jeff Scott Soto guy? Every time I open up, people are praising him and oh God, you want the best singer? He's the guy. Blah 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 blah. And he talked me up, and he just forwarded my number to Neil, and Neil called me one day and said, hey, I'll be in town in LA at the NAMM show. Maybe we can meet up and do like some kind of jam there at the Gibson party.
Ooh, wow.
So I put together my solo band. We're all there. We put together a set list, and that was kind of, we met, and that's what initiated us continuing to work together.
And Soul Circus went on for a minute, right? Like I can't remember. Who else was in Soul Circus in that lineup?
Well, we got Marco Mendoza.
Right, Marco was in that. That's right. Yeah.
We were able to kind of steal him from Whitesnake.
Yeah.
And Dean was in the band for a short time, but Dean was dealing with he just couldn't handle being away from home at that point so solidly, and the Journey tours were just kicking his ass. So he's like, guys, I'm sorry, I want to do this, I love you, but I need a break, I need to recharge, I need time with my family, just had a new baby and all that. And he had to bow out of the band, so we auditioned a few drummers, and Virgil Donati was our guy.
That's right. So you go from
I remember Ray Luzier came up, and Tommy Clufetis. I can never say his last name.
The Ozzy Osbourne.
All three of those guys, they flew up to San Francisco. We were rehearsing, and they entered the room at different times, and both Tommy and Ray looked at each other and go, well, Virgil's here. We lost this gig. And I loved them. I loved them all. I mean, Ray's one of my favorite drummers of all time. One of my favorite people. Yeah. And it's the first time I heard Tommy play, and he everything he played was just like at 11. Like
I know.
Stuck to the ceiling. And it was amazing, but it was so good. But Virgil had kind of a swing, something that Neil was looking for. He didn't want a basher. He already had that with Neil, even though, I'm sorry, with Dean. Dean was a basher playing Journey stuff. He wanted somebody that had a little more stylistic flow to what we were doing musically, and Virgil was our guy.
Totally. Yeah, you forget. I mean, Neil's a very musical cat. He's not just like a guitar god. He's actually like a very musical guy. Yeah.
You hear it even in his solos. They're very melodic and they're like hummable. That's what I even like about Slash's playing. He gives you memorable, hummable solos that okay, maybe a billion guitar players can play them, but nobody does them like him. Exactly. And nobody would come up with something that memorable like those guys.
It's so much so that if you can't just kind of go, it's in E, I'll just play something. You go, no, you have to play the solo, because it's like it's part of the song. It's like
right.
So that's your connection to Neil when the Journey position comes up, right?
Yeah.
With Steve.
Steve Augeri was having vocal issues even that year on that.
What happened to Steve? I don't really. I mean, I remember seeing Steve like on TV or whatever back then, and thinking, wow, this guy's really great, for, not being Steve Perry, which was, always the issue, but I always thought he was really great. And then all of a sudden he was, I mean, as a vocalist, you're always like, oh no, when you hear somebody's having trouble, you go, oh boy, what does that mean?
Yeah.
He just had some sort of issues.
He did things on his own terms, in terms of when he wanted to drop a song. He wasn't really looking to do it the traditional method of, okay, well, I'm just going to write a bunch of songs. I'm going to shop a deal. Whatever he did it under his own terms. And every once in a while, like every few months, he'd release a single and just kind of testing the waters. I think the same way it was kind of a difficult situation for me out of Journey, it was a little more difficult for him because he'd already put in 8 years. For me, it was easier. I hadn't recorded an album with him, hadn't done any live DVDs or anything like that people will remember me by, or that they even would remember my name so much. But I still walked away from the situation going, I just played in front of 900,000 people in the course of 11 months, and I can't even fill up a club of 50 people, in the same regions that we were selling out all those shows. Because in the end, those people went to hear Don't Stop Believin', and they went to see a band called Journey. They didn't go to see Jeff Scott Soto. They didn't go to see the guy that replaced the guy that replaced the guy. It was none of that. Where I think with Steve, I think he needed to play it out his way, to know that either you're going to have a huge expectation of everybody thinking everybody's pulling and pushing to get you, or the opposite. Like, well, you're not Steve Perry. You'll never be Steve Perry. So we're going to treat you that way. And he did things his way, and it seemed to work for him. It's
a big reality check. There's big reasons why, when someone leaves a band, that band name is often way more valuable than any individual, because it's a working entity, and it's business, it's name recognition, and all that stuff. And we all know all that. That's why, I mean, I guess it could be argued if Steven Tyler had left Aerosmith, maybe it wouldn't quite have worked with some other guy singing for Aerosmith. But it's one of those examples where you see it all the time, where the name Journey is clearly bigger than almost any other individual. But your run in that thing must have been a blast for what it was. I mean, as much as
indeed.
It's always that in those days it must have had that weird feeling of like, this is just a temporary thing. Like at some point, the Steve Perry button has to get pushed or something. Always, until finding Arnell, it always felt like it's just a matter of time before this happens. So the fact that it hasn't happened to this day is still kind of a wow. It's just, I guess it's never going to happen.
Of course,
it's
one of the hardest things that both Jerry and I, and even Arnell, had to deal with is the fact that Steve Perry is he's very well alive, and obviously even after releasing an album recently, he still has his voice. He still can be active if he wanted to be, and chooses not to. Whereas like a situation like where Adam Lambert or even Paul Rodgers stepped into fronting Queen.
Yeah.
Freddie's not coming back.
No.
If you want to hear the band live, if they want to be able to play their legacy live and continue celebrating the legacy of Queen, they have to have a frontman. They have to have a singer. You're not going to get Freddie.
No.
Whereas Journey, dude's down the street, very much alive and eating at an Italian restaurant, and could step in any second now. So that's what the fans think about. They think about, why are you wasting your time with this tall Puerto Rican dude who sounds totally wrong for the band, or this other guy he's got a beautiful voice, but he's not Steve Perry, when Steve Perry's just down the street? Give the guy a call. It doesn't work that way, as you and I know. And so that was the biggest obstacle we both had to deal with, especially in my situation, replacing the guy who replaced the guy. I had to deal with, they already had somebody that sounded like Perry to them. Who is this guy and why? And so, it's brutal out there, man. It's tough.
It's tough, but I'm there's very few guys who could have stepped into those shoes, and you are at the top of that list. I mean, it's clear that you more than had the chops, and it's but I mean, it's just another one of those things that you did. It's another a step along the way that you've done, and I think it's a really interesting one. But in a lot of ways, I think you've done so much that the Journey thing is just kind of like a tiny footnote along the way of like, oh yeah, he also did this. But it's kind of like all these other things that you've done, like singing in the Rockstar soundtrack stuff. That's pretty cool. How'd that come about?
In 95 or 96? I don't remember exactly what year it was. No, it was before that. I forget what year. When Stryper were doing the last, I think it was the last album for Hollywood Records. It was their first and only secular album called Against the Law. I've been friends with those guys since I launched with Yngwie. We've been buddies with Oz and Michael Sweet since 1985.
Wow.
And I just got a call out of the blue one day because they love my voice, and we mutual respect, and I love that band. I got called into the studio. Michael basically said, listen, we're doing this album, and it's going to be our first secular album. It's not everything's going to be attached to the whole Christianity thing.
Right.
So it's going to be a tougher record, but we also wanted the vocals to reflect that tougher angle. We naturally we sound like angels when we sing, which works for the Christianity side of things, but we wanted a tougher sound for this stuff. And I think your voice would actually be able to add that timbre to what we're doing.
Cool.
So they pulled me in, and Tom Werman was producing that record, and everything they wanted, everything they didn't even know they wanted, I was there, and I was like, boom, 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 just knocking all these badass harmonies. And I love listening to that record because you could just hear me soaring on every song. It's so badass.
Cool.
And Tom was that impressed that he hired me on every record he produced until he went into retirement.
Wow.
So the last album I did for him was a band called Pariah out of Austin. And then that's it. He bought a B&B in Maine, and he just got out of the music business. He just wanted to be a B&B run. He ran a B&B in in that part of the country. So they pulled him back from retirement to produce the Rockstar soundtrack. And when they were dropping names of singers who could be for who in the movie, et cetera, he said, yeah, I worked with Jeff Scott Soto so many times as a backing singer. I'd love to work with him as a lead vocalist. I think he'd be badass for this. And luckily I had the reinforcement of Zach Wilde and Jeff Pilson. My buddies sitting there going, oh yeah, you got to get Jeff. And that's, they brought me in. I basically sang every song that was on that soundtrack.
It's crazy.
But when it finally got to the director and the musical supervisor, they realized my voice will work, but it won't work for Mark. It won't work for Wahlberg because I sound too seasoned, too mature, too good, I guess.
Interesting.
And I was just doing what I do. I wasn't trying to be a character. I was just singing the songs based on how my voice fit over them. And that's when they decided your voice fits more. Your voice should be the seasoned guy, the guy that's being replaced in the band, because he's the one that's been there. He's the one that's got that. It's already there, where you got the guy in the audience. He's in a tribute band. He's not quite as seasoned, and he's a little more green.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it worked out great. And it's one of those pieces of history in my life that to this day, I still grasp onto when I'm playing a live show and you hear people stand up and shout. I get to do that song live. And I just covered the song Living the Life on a new duets album that I'm putting out. And that was a lot of fun to re-sing on that. It gave me kind of another identity and another stamp to my legacy that I had nothing to do with in a normal circumstance.
And what was it like sitting in a movie theater watching some other guy, move his lips and it's your voice coming out of it? That must be like.
I'd done it once before, so I was expecting it. In '88, I did the same thing. It was a movie about a club singer, kind of a biker rebel guy, and he falls in love with this rich girl. That was the name of the movie, called Rich Girl. They were young and fell in love, Romeo and Juliet kind of thing. And father's like, "You're not hanging out with this rebel
biker
piece
dude.
Of crap." And yeah, and so my voice was his voice every time he sang in the movie, and the movie was so bad. Oh my God, it was.
I'm gonna go.
I remember I went to the screening. This is a funny story. I went to the screening, and to me, it was like, oh my God, this is abysmal. This is so bad. I don't want my name on this. And so the movie's over, and there's like maybe 30 of us sitting there in a small screening room, and I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? And next day, I remember calling the music supervisor. I said, listen, I just got off the phone with the label that I'm on, and they do not want to release the rights for my name to be the courtesy of performed by on there. What do you mean? This will be a great stepping stone for you. I know. I tried to tell them this. Well, what are we going to do? We can't. It's too late to remove your voice. I go, well, why don't you use my initials as my name? So sure. JSS, my name was JAY is the first name. The last name is ESS is one name. So JSS is the singer on those songs. And I remember when it finally came out, I went to an actual movie theater. It was one of these, the complexes where they have all the big size theaters. Opening day, it was in the smallest one. It was in the kind of theater that when something's already basically out the window, it's run its course. They put it in the smaller theater. It debuted in this theater, and there was maybe a handful of people. I'm like, thank God I pulled my name from
you dodged that bullet. Was there anybody of note in that film? Like anybody that went on to be anything, or?
No, not really. There was an actress named Jill Shellen, and she did Stepdad or Stepchild. She was like horror movies. Girl.
So the name sounds familiar. Wow.
And there was an actor in the movie that was Robert Mitchum's grandson, and we still chat. We're still friends to this day. A guy named Bentley Mitchum. That was the closest. Oh no, Cherie Curry. That's right. Cherie Curry was actually in the band. She was in the band, and she was one of the. But she wasn't known as an actress. She was still out of the Runaways. She was trying to make her mark and do her own thing, but she was in the movie as well. But yeah, it was pretty bad.
So how did the I know we're probably jumping all over the place, but how does the
that's fine.
When you were talking about Trans-Siberian earlier, were you aware of Trans-Siberian? I mean, for those that don't know, it's like it's a gigantic. It's the Sabotage guys create essentially a Christmas show that goes on to be gigantic. It's a massive thing, and there's multiple.
They like to call it a holiday show.
Holiday show. I apologize.
Because it's a holiday theme based on the stories that Paul O'Neill crafted, and the lyrics that he crafted are very Capra-esque in terms of it starts off where it's wonderful, and all your memories of childhood memories of Christmas and all that, and then some things go awry and things get a little dark in life, and then you kind of find your way back home. It's you find the angel ringing the bell that you got your wings. Right. All the stories are kind of like that. So they like to just call them holiday traditions, as it's not necessarily based around Christmas. It just happens to be. So that way it leaves it open, for those who don't celebrate Christmas, but they still celebrate the holidays. Yeah. And it's a smart way of looking at it as well. But yeah, again, it's a longer story than I don't want to give you the boring details. I met Al Petrelli at the very last show of the very first Talisman tour in 1990. It was a show in Sweden. He was playing for Alice Cooper. And at that point, I was in a band, and the entire tour was all in Sweden. I was my entire month of fruit, and just feeling like I'm so disjointed and so disconnected from being able to speak without broken words, and I'm like, oh, I just want to have a conversation without having to think of what I'm saying. Right. So I met Al at the hotel bar, basically after that show, after watching Alice and those guys, and we became best of friends literally from that night. And that was back in 1990. Now we fast forwarded to 2001, I believe it was, maybe 2002. Through the years, I run into Al again without cell phones and all that stuff, or even email. We just see each other when we see each other. But when it was an immediate bond every time we saw each other. So now we went to a mutual friend's wedding, and I hadn't seen him in quite a while, but I'd heard of this TSO thing, and he was telling me about it. And all I can remember is going back to how I felt about musical theater, I'm like, yeah, good luck with that. It wasn't like, wow, that sounds interesting. That's intriguing. That was like, oh God, that's the last thing I would ever want to do, but more power to you, brother. And so he told me about it then. He was giving me kind of by then they were already touring the bigger places. Cause when they started out, it was like a week of gigs and with one box truck van or whatever out there. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And by then they were already doing two bands, doing two different coasts, doing, a lot of bigger gigs. Mm-hmm. But I was still kind of like, that sounds kind of corny and cheesy. It's not for me. Now we fast forward to 2007, literally 2 days after I got fired from Journey. So this would have been maybe late May, early June of 2007. I get a call from Al. He goes, dude, I'm reading all about this. I'm so sorry to hear this. But with this bad news, I'm calling you to say I'm sorry about it. I might have some good news for you. My boss, Paul O'Neill, wants to meet you. We're working on a TSO album now that's not a non-holiday album. Right, right. You see over my shoulder. Yeah, of course. He said he's auditioned everybody in the TSO Rolodex and then some. He's gone outside to theater. He's gone out to the rock world. And I told him about you, and he wants to meet you. I'm like, oh, there's no pressure there. So he flew me out to Tampa, and going back to what I was saying earlier, we did not work on music for the first 7 hours. It literally, Paul O'Neill was one of the most interesting, and still to this day, one of the most interesting human beings I've ever met in my life. Very, just like you, not drinking, not smoking, took care of himself. But he was so smart. He was so book smart. He was so street smart. He was the epitome of having both. He understood what it was like to struggle and to fight and work your ass off to get there. But he was already there. So he also knew how to be charitable, how to be kind, and how to embrace the people that he works with and the people that he surrounds himself with. Right. And I got that immediately from him. And that alone made me want to be part of the organization, just to finally work with an organization that's that big, but treats you like we're all on the same playing field. And I love that about him. again, 7 hours of conversation, learning about history, learning about him telling me the story of the Night Castle album, what it entails, how it was crafted and created, etc. And finally, after 7.5 hours of speaking, he says, okay, I want to hear you, boss. I want to hear what you sound like. I think I sang maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And from there, he said, I'd love to have you come down and spend some time with me and have you on this record. And it was one of the only TSO albums where there's 5 songs from one singer. Normal TSO albums have 1 or 2, maybe 3 maximum. This one had 5 because it was a lead character. It was a character that had to really bring across his message and his words. And man, it's again, talk about validation. These are the things you long for in your life and your career that mean way more than the fortune and the fame and all that. The validation from people, the respect from your peers to go, oh my God, this guy loves me that much that he's trusting me with his story.
Yeah,
and that's where it all started for me.
And it's a great example of that one door closing and then another door just opens. You know, it's like
it's the old cliche, but God damn it, it's so true.
It's so true, and I think it's really, really, it's really inspiring to hear that, because it's. How many songs do you sing during the course of a show in Trans-Siberian Orchestra?
It varies. There was one year, and again, it's there's never usually more than 2 from one singer. And when I first joined them, I was only supposed to do 1, and I was the understudy for one of the other singers who actually had to leave on emergency leave on my first tour. So I had to sing his song for the first half of the tour. He came back for maybe 2 shows, and then he was called emergency again. So I ended up doing those 2 songs my first bout, where everybody else just has 1 song. The next year I was doing 3. The next I was doing 4. I mean, it was to the point where they were kind of joking and mocking me, saying, "Yeah, it's turning into T.S. Soto," because I was singing 4. But that it's funny. It still doesn't sound like a lot of work. But the thing about the TSO show and everything about it, the taxing thing about it is the up and down of going on the stage. Okay, you first have your sound check, you know, like say 1 o'clock in the afternoon, then you have a matinee. So you got to warm up and get ready for a matinee. You do your 4 songs and singing background on 3 songs. So you're basically back and forth on the stage 7 times. As opposed to just getting up there and staying up there. And once you're done, you're done. Then you're backstage yapping with the other guys in the band. You go to dinner in between shows, and then show number 2, you do the same drill again.
That's
right. And then after that, you have your meet and greet where you're seeing all your personal guests. And then after that, we have a public signing thing where they've set up tables, and anybody who wants to stick around after the show, which is usually quite a few hundred, we're signing and taking photographs and saying hello. So it literally is a 12.5 to 13-hour day of blah, 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 blah. And when you think about it, it's like, my voice is spent from singing very easy baritone range songs more so than singing a 90-minute Journey set. Why is that? Because there's so much entailed. There's so much physical side entailed to a day in TSO that it's actually more taxing than a regular gig. But that's one of the other things I really loved about Paul O'Neill and I respected about him. This is why he has multiple singers in the field, because you get 1 or 2 singers and they sing everything. Eventually somebody's going to get sick or the voice is going to tire, and that show's not going to be as good as the one last week or the one prior to that. Every show has to be as good as the last. The first night has to be as good as the last night, and there were no exceptions with that. And that's why there are multiple singers, because we're backing each other up, but we're also we're preserving ourselves by not over singing, not doing too much. And it worked. The demographic works so great.
And you've been doing that for how long now?
I joined officially in 2007, but my first winter tour with them, any kind of touring or whatever, was in 2008. So if you add the live stream thing that we did last year, this will be my 2000. I hate these numbers. My 13th year.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, and it's such a cool thing, and it's got so many, Joe Hoekstra and all these other guys employed in the company. Some Blas Elias, a lot of great people that we love. So let's end off with your Sons of Apollo, because it's that's an interesting one too. Because had you known everybody in that lineup prior to it coming together, or is that sort of the supergroup thing is an interesting thing, because you're dealing with like guys who have long history. Everybody's got a different way
of working and how 100%. They work and who they work with. Yeah, chemistry is absolutely a big factor, huge factor, as you're very well aware, and that's probably why the conspirators, the lineup has remained for so long, because you guys have your chemistry, your core chemistry is there.
We do, yeah, that's true, yeah.
And so, I'd met Mike Portnoy through the years. I think the first time was mid '90s, and then just hello, and we know of each other, respect each other, like each other, that type of thing. That was the gist of knowing Mike. Same with Derek, because Derek was with Yngwie at one point, so we'd always, we kind of ran in the same circles. And Derek was the only one that lived in LA besides Billy. Billy I'd known since 1985, because Talus was our support band on the first Yngwie tour.
Oh, wow.
So I spent months on the road with Billy, and I got to know Phil Nero and Johnny Angel and Mark Miller, the drummer from Talus. We were a tight group, especially Billy was just before the David Lee Roth thing. So he was becoming the legend that became Billy Sheehan at the same time Yngwie was.
Of course.
So I was on tour with these two, future legends, so to speak.
Totally.
But I've known Billy, he's the one I've known the longest. So the way it came down, my band Soto, we happened to share the same booking agent in South America as Winery Dogs. Right. And as we were looking to book a Soto tour in South America, my dear friend Ricky, who's the one that owns the company that was booking the Winery Dogs tour, said, "Listen, I have an idea. It has to be approved by the band and the band's management, but I think it would be better for you guys to support Winery Dogs. I'll still get you the money that you normally would be making on your own tour, but you'll be playing to more people." And I said, that's more important to me, is that I'm not going out there and paying to play, or that we can't even afford to buy a Big Mac.
Right.
We have to at least be able to do what we would normally be doing on our own level if we were doing a club tour. And so it was an immediate yes. It was immediate approval. David Z, rest his soul, was my bass player, was a bass player in Soto. Yeah. And he was also very good friends with Portnoy. I'd known Richie through the years. We're pretty close. I've played poker at his house and gone swimming at his pool, etc. And of course, Billy, we had our relationship. So I knew, but it was from that I saw, wow, well, either Mike is really good friends with David. It says connection's unstable. I wonder if that's near you.
We're back now, either way.
Okay.
We can edit around.
Did I drop out?
A little bit, but that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Mike was on the side of the stage watching the show every night, and I had no idea that it wasn't just being nice. He was actually scouting me.
Of course.
Prior, he'd done a couple albums with Derek and Billy and Tony McAlpine. It's kind of an instrumental outfit called PSMS. Yes. And they did a couple tours, and it was all fusion, instrumental, proggy kind of stuff. So I'm going to fail from Mike saying happy birthday. And I'm like, what does he give me, like a drum kit from Drink Theater or something? This is going to be cool. Mike Portnoy's giving me a badass birthday present. So Mike calls me as I'm at the airport flying to TSO rehearsals, and he said, "Okay, listen, this is your birthday present should you choose to accept it." Told me about PSMS. I knew all about it. He says, the next album we want to do with vocals. And I was watching every night, and I know you're our guy. There was no auditioning. There was no, let's get together and write, see how you sound. It was like Mike Portnoy said, "You are our guy. Boom, you're in."
Wow.
And I said, absolutely, without even hearing, should you choose to accept? I said, yes, I'm absolutely want to work with Mike, Derek, and Billy again. And at that time, Tony. Somewhere along the way, there was a shift and from that, we had to change the name from PSMS or whatever. That would have been adding an extra S to it, to Sons of Apollo.
And Ron got involved on guitar.
They got Ron involved before we started writing the songs, because from what I gathered, from what I heard Mike and Derek talk about in interviews, as talented and crazy good as Tony McAlpine is, they knew he didn't really come from the hard rock world, and they wanted more of a hard rock guitar player, and that was Bumblefoot had that style, that level of that he could add the chops and the level of crazy alien-esque musicality, as well
Absolutely.
As the hard rock kind of element that they were looking, and kind of getting it away from just being a prog band and fusion and all that. They realized our songs, the meat and potatoes of them are going to consist of things that you can grasp on to sing along to, but in between, that's where all the kitchen sink stuff was going to be thrown at you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly the best description of the group that I can tell too, is they're songs, you know what I mean? Like they're not like just an excuse for, let's listen to Jeff sing for a little bit and then have some guitar playing that's going to be off the charts, you know? No, they're really good songs. And again, you shine a lot on that stuff, which is, you know, I think is the best part of it in a lot of ways is
thanks, man.
You're able to take, you know, this sometimes very ambitious music and make great songs out of them. You know what I mean?
And that was their whole ideal. They wanted to make sure that whenever I was singing, whenever it was something that was supposed to sell the song, it was the strongest part of those songs that was selling them, as opposed to, okay, well, Jeff's just going to sing in between while we're doing all the as I like to call it, guitar masturbation stuff.
Well, and there are a lot of groups like that where it's kind of like a bunch of musos and just kind of like sing something and then we're just going to play all day long. Yeah. So,
and they really put a lot of effort behind that. The first album really consisted of Derek and Mike looking over my shoulder and making sure, I mean, I kind of knew where to take the band, but they also had an idea when they were writing the songs. They were getting melodies and things were kind of sticking to their heads as they were before I was even involved.
Cool. Well, that's
so they wanted to make sure
too.
They wanted to make sure they shared that with me. So if one of my ideas was either not strong enough, or if one of their ideas was strong enough that it needed to actually be pursued, you know, we absolutely went that way. And by the time we did the second record, I already had that under my hat. I knew exactly what to do with this band and where to bring us to the next record and as we're moving forward.
That's so
I got
cool.
to do it right here with this microphone in my own private space.
Probably a little different than the normal way of doing it. But so what have you got anything on the calendar yet? Like, it's been interesting talking to everybody now that things are slowly starting to open up. Like, what do you got coming up?
Well, we've rescheduled the Suns tour 4 times already. Yeah. And right now, the only thing we're rescheduled and we're hoping stick is the South American tour in January next year. I think it should be able to happen as long as their vaccine rollouts start beginning throughout the summer. Right. And as long as they're able to start their herd immunity around October and November, I think we'll be able to make those dates finally in January. But as you just said, everybody's scrambling and trying to make up for 2 years of lost time. So we all come from situations that everybody else is waiting for these bands to tour as well as us to tour. And that's been the hardest one to kind of wrangle together. So I think at this point we're going to hold off on when we're going to actually hit the rest of the tour until we can see when everybody else is going to be booked, and then we're just going to work around it.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, it's such an interesting thing because, like you said, we were talking about it even before we started, how universal this experience has been when you talk to your friends in Australia or Japan or everywhere. Everybody's going through the same thing. And although America now seems to be, you know, here in the US, there's a lot more things opening up, and it seems to be like, so I'm assuming you guys will probably start floating around like every, you know, I don't have anything on the calendar, so I'm just kind of like waiting to see what, you know, who's going to call.
Well, we had the privilege of you joining us for a couple songs when we played in Vegas with Jason Bieler. So that's probably the main one that I can say are dead set and announced and booked now for this year. I think that they're starting late September into most of October. So Jason and I are going back out our Weekend Warrior stuff. And the moment, fingers crossed, at the moment, the TSO tour is booked and being held, and hoping that we're going to be able to pull it off this year.
Fantastic. Well, I hope it all works out. And that Jason, you and Jason together is so great.
Thanks, man.
It's great musically, and it's really entertaining just the way it turns into, like, you know, Jason's a very funny cat, and you guys together are so great. But yeah, it's such a really fun show. So if anybody gets to see that, please go see it. But man, it's
hopefully when we come through Vegas again, maybe we can.
You won't be able to get rid of me.
You into.
Yeah.
I'll buy you all the drinks you want, and because you don't drink, I'll drink them.
Yeah, exactly. A bottle of water, and you can have the rest. Well, man, I'm so happy you got to hang out a little bit. I'm really glad we got to catch up. Even if we didn't record and play these for other people, it's just awesome to connect and see other people. Because for the longest time, it's like,